The ship fell from the sky like a dying star. The cargo vessel Quiet Dawn had survived 100 journeys across the dark spaces between worlds. It had carried soldiers and traders, hunters and healers. But on this night, above the frozen moon called 4, the ship met something it could not fight. A magnetic storm, invisible and angry, reached up from the moon's surface and grabbed the vessel like a giant hand. It tore through the navigation systems. It killed the engines. And then it let go, and the ship dropped. Inside, there was screaming. Metal bent and broke. Fire bloomed in the cargo hold before the emergency systems choked it dead. And when the Quiet Dawn finally stopped moving, half buried in ice and snow, the silence that followed was worse than the noise had been. Opened her eyes. She was hanging sideways, held in place by her crash harness. Blood dripped from a cut on her forehead, falling past her muzzle and onto the cracked viewport beside her. Through the broken glass, she could see only white. Snow. Ice. Nothing else. She called, her voice was rough. A groan answered her. She turned her head and saw her mate still strapped into the seat beside her. His fur was matted with blood. His left arm hung at a bad angle, but his eyes were open, and that was enough. The cubs whispered, "Find the cubs." His heart went cold. She tore at her harness with her claws until it snapped free, and she fell hard onto what had been the wall of the cabin. She didn't feel the pain. She was already running, climbing through the twisted metal toward the rear compartment where her children had been sleeping. She found them alive. Senna and were curled together in the corner of their sleeping pod, which had been thrown clear of its mounting and now lay on its side against a broken support beam. Senna, the older one, had wrapped herself around her smaller brother. Her golden eyes were wide with fear, but she was not crying. Cubs did not cry. They went silent when danger was near. "Mother," Senna whispered, gathered them both in her arms and held them so tight that they squeaked in protest. She didn't care. They were alive. They were alive. But they wouldn't be for long if she didn't get them warm. The ship's heating system was dead. Already could see her breath forming clouds in the air. The temperature inside the cabin was dropping fast, and outside, through the cracks in the hull, she could hear the wind screaming. The storm was still raging, and on a moon like 4, with no atmosphere to hold warmth, the cold would kill them in hours. She carried the cubs back to where lay. The other survivors had gathered there. The pack's second female was trying to stop the bleeding from a deep wound in shoulder. Young stood apart, his fur bristling with fear and anger, and in the corner, unmoving, lay the pilot. His neck was bent at an angle that told everything she needed to know. "The beacon," said. "Did anyone activate the beacon?" "I did," replied without looking up. "But it's damaged. The signal is weak. It might reach our ships, it might not." "How long until help could arrive?" 2 days, maybe 3. Looked at her cubs. Senna was shivering now, had buried his face in her chest and would not come out. Cubs could not control their body temperature the way adults could. They needed pack warmth. They needed fur pressed against fur, breath mixing with breath. But the adults were injured, bleeding, and growing cold themselves, had already slipped into unconsciousness. His body was fighting just to stay alive. "We need to find shelter," said. "Somewhere warmer, somewhere." "There is nothing here," interrupted. His voice was sharp with despair. "This moon is dead, ice and rock, nothing else." Wanted to strike him for speaking that way in front of the cubs, but before she could respond, raised his head. His ears swiveled forward, focusing on something beyond the broken hull. "Listen," he said. They all went still. At first heard only the wind, but then beneath it came another sound. A steady crunching rhythm, footsteps. Something was walking toward them through the storm. Bared his teeth, a predator. On a dead moon, shook her head. "There is no life here, nothing could survive." The footsteps stopped. A shadow appeared in the gap where the hull had torn open. And then a light clicked on, cutting through the swirling snow, and saw the face of the creature that had found them. It was a human. He was smaller than had expected. Humans were supposed to be dangerous. Her people had fought wars with them. They had killed each other across a dozen worlds. And yet this one looked almost fragile standing there in his heavy thermal suit, snow gathering on his shoulders, his soft skin exposed to the killing cold. He had no claws, no fangs. His eyes were flat and forward-facing like a predator's, but they held no aggression. Only surprise, only wonder. The human said something. His voice was muffled by the wind and did not understand his language anyway. But she understood his body. She watched as he looked at the wreckage, at the blood, at her injured. She watched as his eyes moved to the cubs trembling in her arms. And then the human did something impossible. He stepped forward. He dropped to one knee in the snow, and he held out his hand, palm facing up, fingers spread. His other hand moved to his collar, pulling down the fabric to expose his throat. His claws extended on instinct. This was a trap. It had to be. Humans did not submit. Humans did not offer their throats to. Humans fought and schemed and conquered. That was what her people had always taught her. But the human didn't move. He just knelt there, hand extended, throat bare, waiting. The snow fell around him. The wind howled, and still he waited. Behind her made a small sound. She looked back and saw that his eyes had opened again. He was looking at the human, and something in his expression made pause. "Not submission," whispered, his voice barely audible. He is offering a choice." Turned back to the human. His arm was beginning to shake from holding the position. His skin was turning red from the cold, but he did not lower his hand. The cubs were dying. The ship was dead. The storm would kill them all before rescue could arrive. Made her choice. She walked past the human into the storm, and her pack followed. And behind them, rising to his feet and brushing the snow from his knees, came the human who had offered his throat to wolves. The walk through the storm lasted forever. Could see nothing but white. The snow struck her face like tiny knives, and the wind pushed against her body with such force that each step was a battle. She carried against her chest, feeling his small body shake with cold. Behind her and supported between them, half carrying, half dragging the wounded alpha through the drifts, walked last, his injured shoulder held tight against his body, his eyes scanning for danger that could come from anywhere. And ahead of them the human walked. He moved with purpose, his head down against the wind, his body leaning forward like a ship pushing through waves. Every few steps, he would look back to make sure they were following. Did not know if she wanted to thank him or kill him. Perhaps both. After what felt like hours, a shape appeared in the whiteness. At first thought it was a rock, just another dead thing on this dead moon. But then she saw the light glowing from a small window and she understood. A building. A shelter. The human reached the door first. He pulled it open and held it against the wind, waiting for them to enter. One by one, the pack stumbled inside. When the door closed behind them, the silence was so sudden that ears rang. The shelter was small. One main room with a bed, a desk covered in equipment, a tiny cooking area. The walls were metal, lined with pipes and wires. A heating unit hummed in the corner, filling the space with warmth that made frozen muscles ache. It was clearly built for one person, one human. And now there were 7 crowded inside, bleeding and shivering and taking up every bit of space. The human moved quickly. He stripped off his outer suit and hung it by the door, revealing a simple shirt and pants beneath. He was even smaller without the bulky clothes. Thin arms, soft middle, no natural weapons at all. Could have killed him with one swipe of her claws. But she watched as he went to his bed and pulled off all the blankets. He carried them to where lay on the floor and wrapped them around the injured alpha with careful hands. He checked wounds, his face twisting with concern even though he could not possibly understand biology. Then he went to the heating unit and adjusted the controls and felt the temperature rise even higher. The light hurt her eyes, came from forest worlds dark and green. This human lived in brightness. But before could say anything, the human went to his desk and touched something. The lights dimmed to a soft glow. He had noticed, He had changed it for them. Did not know what to do with this information. She stood in the middle of the small room, still holding, watching the human move around his own shelter like a servant in someone else's house. He brought water and offered it to each of them in turn. He found dried food in a storage bin and held it out to, who sniffed it suspiciously before taking it. He spoke sometimes, soft sounds in his human language, but he seemed to understand that they could not answer. So he just kept moving, kept helping, kept giving. Finally, he sat down on the floor with his back against the wall. He was breathing hard. His skin was wet with sweat despite the cold he had just walked through. For the first time, saw how tired he was. How frightened he must have been, walking into a crashed ship full of the one species in the galaxy that his people had never been able to make peace with. Why had he come? What did he want from them? A small sound pulled her attention away. Was making the noise that cubs made when they were too cold. A high, thin whimper that meant his body was giving up. She looked down and saw that his fur was still wet from the snow, and his eyes were half closed, and his breathing was too slow. Senna was the same. She sat curled in the corner near the heating unit, but even there she was shaking badly. The warmth in the room was not enough. Cubs needed direct heat, body heat, pack heat. Pulled Senna to her and pressed both cubs against her chest. She wrapped her arms around them and tried to give them her warmth, but she had walked through the same storm. Her body was nearly as cold as theirs. She could feel the heat leaving her faster than she could make it. She said, but was unconscious, and even if he woke, he was too injured to hold the cubs, and were still shivering themselves. Was young and healthy, but he stood apart, watching, making no move to help. The cubs were dying in her arms, and there was nothing she could do. The human stood up. He walked toward her slowly, his hands visible, his movements calm. He stopped a few steps away and pointed at the cubs. Then he touched his own chest. Then he held out his arms. Understood what he was offering, and everything inside her screamed no. Did not give their children to strangers. Did not let other species touch their young. The cubs were helpless. They were precious. They were hers, and this creature, this soft, clawless thing, wanted to hold them. No, she growled. The word came out in her own language, but her meaning was clear. The human did not step back. He pointed at the cubs again, and then at himself, and then he did something that made pause. He pressed his hand flat against his chest over his heart, and felt it. Warmth. The human's body was warm. Not the weak warmth of the room, but deep internal heat rising from his core, pouring through his skin. Humans, she remembered now, were different. They came from a world of endless summer. Their blood ran hot. Their hearts beat slow and strong and pushed heat into every part of their bodies. The human was offering to be their fire. Whimpered again. His eyes closed all the way this time, and he did not open them. Made her choice. She stepped forward and placed both cubs in the human's arms. He took them gently, so gently, as if he understood how precious they were. And then, still moving slowly, he sat back down against the wall and pulled open his shirt. His fangs were at his throat before she could think. Her claws pressed against his chest, ready to tear through flesh. A growl rose from deep in her body, shaking the walls of the small room. The human did not move, did not scream. He just sat there holding her cubs against his bare skin, his eyes calm, his heart beating that slow, steady rhythm. And then made a sound. It was soft, so soft that only a mother's ears could hear it. The sound was called in its language. It was the noise a cub made when it found safety, when it found warmth, when it stopped being afraid. Little pressed his cold body closer to the human's chest. His tiny claws hooked into the fabric of the human's shirt. His breathing slowed and his shivering stopped, and he made that sound again. Senna moved next, burrowing against the human's side, seeking the heat that poured from his strange body. Within moments, both cubs had gone still, not the stillness of death, the stillness of sleep, real sleep, safe sleep. His fangs were still at the human's throat. She could feel his pulse against her mouth, fast now but not from fear, from strain. He was cold too. He had walked through the same storm, and yet he was giving every bit of his warmth to her children. Slowly she pulled back. The human looked at her. In his eyes she saw exhaustion and pain and something else, something she had no name for. She sat down across from him and watched, and she did not sleep, and she did not look away. And the night stretched on, and the storm raged outside, and her cubs slept peacefully against an alien heart. Hours passed like years. The storm continued its assault on the small shelter, wind screaming against the metal walls, snow piling higher against the single window until the glass showed only white. Inside, the heating unit hummed its steady song, and the pack tried to rest. Slept deeply, his body fighting to heal itself. Lay beside him, her hand on his chest to feel his breathing. Sat near the door with his eyes closed, but knew he was not truly sleeping. He was listening, guarding, and young and restless paced the small space like a caged animal. But watched only the human. He had not moved since taking the cubs. He sat against the wall with his legs stretched out before him, his back straight, his arms wrapped carefully around the two small bodies pressed against his chest. His shirt was still open and could see her children clearly. Senna had turned in her sleep and now lay with her ear pressed directly over the human's heart, had curled into a ball, his face tucked into the hollow of the human's throat. They were warm, they were safe, they were sleeping. The human was not. His eyes stayed open, fixed on some point in the middle distance. His breathing was slow and controlled. Every few minutes his hands would move slightly, adjusting the cub's position, making sure they were comfortable. But he did not shift his weight. He did not stretch his legs. He sat perfectly still, as if he understood that any movement might wake the children. How long had it been now? 6 hours, 7, could see the strain in his face. The muscles in his arms trembled faintly. His skin had grown pale and sweat stood on his forehead despite the cold that still lingered in his bones. Holding 2 cubs for that long would exhaust even for this small, soft creature, it must be agony. And yet he did not stop. Moved closer, his eyes fixed on the human with an expression did not like. He was young. He had lost friends to humans in the border wars. He had been taught all his life that humans were the enemy, clever and cruel, and never to be trusted. "We should kill him," said quietly. "Take the cubs, wait for rescue." His growl was instant and deep. His ears flattened against his skull, and he took a step back, but he did not lower his gaze. "He is human," pressed. "When the storm ends, he will call his own kind. They will come. They will find us weak and injured. They will. Look at them." His voice cut through the tension. She had not opened her eyes, but she spoke clearly. "Look at the cubs. When did they last sleep like that? When did they last stop shivering? When did last make the sound of safety?" Looked, saw his jaw tighten. "He is still human," he said, but his voice was weaker now. "Yes," agreed. "He is still human, and he is still holding our children, and he has asked for nothing." Turned away and returned to his packing, but he did not speak of killing again. Moved closer to the human. She settled onto the floor a few steps away from him, close enough to see every detail of his strange face. His eyes moved to meet hers briefly, then looked away. Not in fear, in respect. Among the direct eye contact from a stranger was a challenge. This human did not challenge her. How did he know? How could he possibly know? "Why?" asked. The word came out in Galactic Common, the trade language that both their species had learned. Her accent was rough, her grammar poor, but the human understood. He thought for a long moment before answering. When he spoke, his voice was soft, barely louder than a whisper, as if he understood that loud sounds would disturb the cubs. "They were cold," he said. "I was warm." Waited for more. There had to be more. Some explanation, some justification, some hidden motive. Humans always had motives. That was what her people said. Humans never gave without expecting something in return. But the human said nothing else. He just sat there, holding her children, as if his answer explained everything. Maybe it did. The night continued. The storm began to weaken, its fury fading into something gentler. Through the gaps in the snow-covered window could see the first pale hints of dawn. Woke. His eyes opened slowly, and he lay still for a long moment, testing his body, feeling his wounds. Then he turned his head and saw the human with the cubs, and his expression went through a dozen emotions that could not name. He said softly, "I know." She moved to his side, pressed her muzzle against his neck. "I know, but they are alive because of him." Was silent. He watched the human for a long time. The human watched back, his eyes calm, his heart still beating that slow rhythm that the cubs seemed to love so much. His heart said finally, "It beats slower than ours, did you notice?" Nodded, she had noticed. "Like a drum beat," continued. "Like the sound of water in a deep cave, constant, patient." He paused. "It sounds like safety." On the human's chest, little Senna stirred. She yawned, showing tiny fangs, and opened her golden eyes. For a moment she seemed confused. Then she looked up at the human's face, and she did not scream. She did not struggle. She simply tucked her head back against his chest and went back to sleep. The human smiled. It was a small smile, tired and gentle, but it transformed his face in a way that had not expected. In that moment, he did not look like an enemy. He did not look like a threat. He looked like something else entirely. "What is your name?" asked. The human looked at her. His smile faded into something more serious, but not unfriendly. He said, "My name is." Repeated the word silently, feeling how it sat in her mouth. A human name, strange and soft. "Thank you," she said. The human shook his head. "No need," he replied. "They were cold, I was warm, that is all." That was not all. Knew it. Every in the room knew it. What this human had done, what he was still doing, went far beyond the simple act of sharing warmth. But perhaps, she thought, that was exactly what made it so powerful. He did not see himself as a hero. He did not expect praise or reward. To him, keeping two dying children warm through a long night was simply what needed to be done. The storm died with the morning. The wind fell silent. The snow stopped falling. And through the small window, now clear enough to see through, the first rays of sunlight touched the frozen surface of 4. And somewhere in the sky above, coming fast, a fleet of ships began their descent. The ships came down like falling stars. Heard them before she saw them. The deep thunder of engines cutting through the thin atmosphere. The whine of weapons systems powering up. The roar of a war pack arriving for blood. She ran to the window and looked up. Against the pale morning sky, she counted 12 vessels dropping toward the surface. Heavy fighters, troop carriers, each one painted with the red marks of the military. Each one carrying warriors who had spent their lives hunting and fighting and killing. They had picked up the distress signal. They had come to rescue their own. They had come expecting to find corpses. "They will kill him," said. He had managed to sit up, though his wounded arm still hung useless at his side. "The moment they see a human among us, they will tear him apart." Knew he was right. The war between their species had been bitter and long. Treaties had been broken. Worlds had burned. Every warrior carried stories of friends and family lost to human weapons. And now, here was a lone human, surrounded by injured, in a place where no witnesses could speak of what happened next. Stood up slowly. The movement woke the cubs, and they made soft sounds of protest as he handed them carefully to. He stretched his arms and saw him grimace with pain. He had held her children for nearly 8 hours without moving. His muscles must be screaming. "Many ships," he said. His galactic common was rough but clear enough. "Your people." "Yes," replied, "but they will not understand. They will see you as a threat." Looked at the window. The first ships were already landing, their engines sending clouds of snow into the air. Warriors were pouring out, weapons drawn, spreading across the frozen ground in hunting formation. "Then I will show them I am not a threat," he said. Before could stop him, he walked to the door and opened it. The cold rushed in immediately, stealing the warmth from the room. Stepped outside without his thermal suit, without any protection at all. He walked forward, his boots crunching in the fresh snow, until he stood alone in the open space between his shelter and the approaching warriors. Grabbed the cubs from and ran after him. The rest of the pack followed, forming a line at her back. They stood in the doorway of the shelter and watched as 60 warriors converged on the single human. The leader of the war pack was called. Knew him by reputation. Everyone did. He was old and had killed more enemies than most could count. His fur was the color of dried blood and his eyes held no warmth. He had led the assault on 3 human colonies during the border wars. He had never shown mercy. He had never needed to. Walked toward with slow, deliberate steps. His warriors fanned out around him, creating a circle of fangs and claws with the human at its center. Some of them were growling. Some of them were already reaching for their weapons. Stood perfectly still. He did not run. He did not try to explain. He did not even raise his hands. He just stood there, a small soft creature in the middle of a pack of killers, and waited for whatever came next. Stopped a few steps away. He was twice the size. His shoulders were broad enough to block out the sun. When he breathed, steam rose from his muzzle like smoke from a fire. "Human," said. The word was a curse in his mouth. Met his eyes. Among this was a challenge. Among this was how you started a fight to the death. But was not, and perhaps he did not care about death anymore. Perhaps a night of holding dying children had burned away his fear. Could not know. She only saw that he did not look away. "Where are my people?" demanded. "What have you done to them?" Before could answer, stepped forward. The warriors turned to look at her and recognition flickered across several faces. She was known. She was the mate of an alpha she had standing here. "He saved them," said. Her voice was clear and strong. "He came to us in the storm. He brought us to shelter. He gave us his warmth when we had none." His eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe that a human helped, that he asked for nothing in return?" "I expect nothing," replied. "I only tell you what I saw." She lifted the cubs, showing them to the war pack. Senna was awake now, her golden eyes watching everything. Was still drowsy, his small claws still hooked into his fur where he clung to her chest. "My children were dying," continued. "The cold was taking them. We could not warm them ourselves. The human held them against his body for the entire night. He did not sleep. He did not move. He gave them his heat until they lived again." Looked at the cubs, then back at the cubs. "Why?" he asked. The question was directed at the human now. Understood. Could see him thinking, searching for words in a language that was not his own. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "They were cold," he said. "I was warm." Stared at him. The warriors stared at him. Even found herself holding her breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "That is not an answer," growled. "It is the only answer," replied. Moved closer. His claws extended. His fangs showed. He lowered his head until his muzzle was inches from his face. "My people have fought your kind for generations," said. "I have killed humans. I have watched humans kill. There is blood between us that will never wash away. And you expect me to believe that you held cubs through the night out of simple kindness." Did not step back. He did not blink. "I do not expect anything," he said. "I only did what needed to be done." Something in his expression shifted. It was small, a tiny crack in the mask of hatred that he wore. Saw it and felt her heart jump. "Show me your hands," commanded. Raised his hands. They were pale and soft and had no claws. They were the hands of a creature that had no natural weapons at all. "These hands held my children," said slowly. "These hands kept them alive through a storm that would have killed them. These hands could have done anything while we were far away, and they chose to give warmth. He fell silent. The wind blew, the snow drifted, and 60 warriors watched their alpha stare at a human who had no way to defend himself. Then turned to look at the cubs. Had woken fully now, and he was reaching toward, making that small sound again. The sound of a cub who had found safety. The sound of a child who wanted to return to the warmth that had saved him. Heard it, every present heard it. And in that moment, everything changed. The silence stretched until it became something physical. 60 warriors stood frozen in the snow. Their weapons were ready. Their claws were out. Every instinct, every teaching, every memory of war told them what to do with the human standing before them. But none of them moved, because their alpha had not moved, and because a cub was crying for the enemy. Reached his small arms toward, making the sound of safety, the sound of warmth. His mother held him tight, but his eyes were fixed on the human who had held him through the longest night of his short life. Watch this. His face showed nothing, but his eyes were alive with something had never seen in him before. Confusion, perhaps, or wonder, or the beginning of understanding. "The cub calls for you," said Tu. His voice was quiet now, almost gentle. Looked at, a small smile touched his tired face. "He knows my heartbeat," replied. He slept to it all night. Was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke again, and his words were directed at. "Tell me again what happened, everything, leave nothing out." So told him. She told him about the crash and the storm, about the broken beacon and the dying cold, about the human who had appeared from the whiteness and offered his throat to strangers, about the shelter and the warmth and the impossible choice she had made, about her cubs dying in her arms and the alien who had held them against his bare skin for 8 hours without rest. When she finished, stood very still. Around him his warriors listened and said nothing. Some of them had lowered their weapons. Others looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight, glancing at each other with uncertain eyes. "You gave him your children," said finally. "You, an alpha female, gave your cubs to a human." "Yes," replied, "because he was warm and they were dying, because he offered himself without asking for anything, because he was willing to die for children that were not his own." Turned back to, the human had not moved throughout the entire conversation. He stood in the snow, wearing only his thin indoor clothes, shivering but silent. The cold was hurting him, could see that, but he would not be the first to look away. He would not be the first to show weakness. "You could have let them die," said. "You could have stayed in your shelter and ignored the crash. No one would have known. No one would have blamed you." "I would have known," said simply. "They are not your people. They are. We have been enemies for 100 years. They are children. They were cold. That is all that mattered." Took a step closer, and another, until he stood directly before, so close that his breath stirred the human's hair. "I have killed your kind," said. "I have led armies against your worlds. I have hated your species for longer than you have been alive. Give me one reason why I should not kill you now." Looked up at him. There was no fear in his eyes, no anger, only exhaustion, and beneath it something that might have been peace. "I cannot give you a reason," said. "I can only tell you what I told the alpha female. They were cold. I was warm. That is why I helped them. If you want to kill me for that, I will not stop you. I could not stop you even if I tried." He paused. Then slowly, he raised his hands and placed them on either side of his throat, pulling down his collar to expose the soft skin beneath. "But before you do," he continued, "give the cubs back. They have slept against my heart all night. They will be confused if I disappear. Be gentle with them. Tell them I had to go away. Tell them something they can understand." Stared at him. Behind them had stopped making the sound. He had started making a different sound now. Higher, sharper, the sound of a cub in distress, the sound of a child watching something terrible about to happen. His heart broke at the noise. She looked at her son, at his tiny face twisted with fear, at his arms still reaching for the human who was about to die. And then did something that no present had ever seen before. He lowered his head. Slowly, deliberately, the great alpha bent forward and exposed the back of his neck, the killing spot, the place of absolute vulnerability, the one place on a body where a single strike could end everything. The yield. Among the yield was the rarest of gifts. It meant total surrender, total acceptance. It meant acknowledging that another being was worthy of trust that went beyond words, beyond reason, beyond anything that could be explained. It was not given because someone was stronger. It was not given because of fear or defeat. It was given because someone had earned it through actions that spoke louder than any promise. The warriors behind dropped to their knees. One by one, they lowered their heads, exposing their own necks, following their alpha into surrender. Stood frozen, his hands still at his throat, his eyes wide with confusion. He did not understand what was happening. How could he? Humans did not have this ritual. Humans did not yield. "What are you doing?" he asked. Raised his head slowly. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You have given more to my people than any human in history. You risked your life for children who were not your own. You asked for nothing. You expected nothing. You gave warmth because you had it and they needed it, and that was enough." He stepped back and straightened to his full height. "You will come with us," said. Blinked, "Am I a prisoner?" "No." Eyes met his, and this time there was no challenge in the gaze, only respect, only gratitude, only something that looked almost like love. "You are Pack." Stepped forward and placed in his arms. The cub immediately pressed himself against the human's chest, hooking his tiny claws into the fabric of his shirt, making the sound once more. Senna reached out too and gathered both cubs close, holding them as naturally as if he had been doing it his whole life. The warriors watched. The wind blew. The sun rose higher in the sky, painting the frozen landscape gold. "Come," said. "There is warmth waiting for you on Velar Prime, and a place in the pack that has been empty for too long." Looked at, she saw the question in his eyes, the uncertainty, the fear of leaving everything he knew for a future he could not imagine. She placed her hand on his shoulder. Her claws did not extend. Her touch was gentle. "Come," she said softly. "You are Pack now, and Pack does not leave Pack behind." Years later, when the diplomats finally established peace between humanity and the Dominion, they would ask why his people had changed. What had shifted in the heart of a species known for their ferocity and pride? The old Alpha, and tired now, would think of a frozen moon and a storm that should have killed everyone. He would think of a small human holding two cubs against his chest, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, giving everything he had because that was simply what needed to be done. "Your kind gives warmth like breathing," would say. "We thought it was weakness. We thought it was something to exploit, to use, to take advantage of. We were wrong." He would show his teeth then, in the expression that used for joy. "It is the greatest strength in the galaxy, and we were blind to it until one man showed us what it meant." On Velar Prime, in a house built for a human but visited constantly by, an old man would sit by a fire with two grown wolves at his feet. They had never forgotten the heartbeat that saved them. They never would. And when the children of the pack asked for stories, the wolves would tell them about the night of the great storm, about the cold that almost killed them, about the human who held them close and kept them warm and asked for nothing in return. They would tell them about the human of Velar Prime, he who warms the young, the man who taught the wolves what it truly meant to be Pack.